It's like this, man. You like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down in the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, see, like, you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like that, man. That's the wind, man. Or like a dang candle, man. It don't matter, man. It's like these old time.
Dude,
Nice.
Aaron, welcome back to Jay Burden Show. How you doing?
Hey, honored to be back, man. I love that intro. That's cool.
Yeah, I love that intro too. I had a previous one that I made, and turns out, I don't know if this is uninteresting, but like royalty free places will say it's royalty free and then reclaim the rights like 2 years later. And so they got all of the advertising revenue off of like 180 episodes going.
What a sneaky little
they
trick,
claimed
dude.
it. Yeah. So then I had to remake it, and I basically just gave one of my friends who's an audio engineer, I was just like, whatever you want. And that's what he came up with. And the first time I heard it, I was like, dude, this is perfect. I love it.
Ours isn't as cool as that one, but it's it's decent enough. But we paid some like Pakistani dude on Fiverr like $25, and I was like, look, let's just try it. If it sucks, then we're no further behind. It's $25 or whatever. But for as far as I was concerned, I was like, you crush it. Well, it was $25 for the video, and then we paid another guy for the voiceover to like voice it. But yeah, I'm like, Fiverr, pretty cool, you know.
Yeah, I think the last time I heard about Fiverr was when that YouTuber got in trouble for paying like random actors in LA to walk around in Nazi uniforms, which that's one of those things where I was like, I'm really glad I didn't know about Fiverr before this story, because if I were 16 with access to that, that's exactly what I would have done too.
I am thankful that I didn't interact with the internet until I was like out of my teenage years. Because I'm going to just admit something, because somebody that's listening to this will be able to identify with this. I'm not a Nazi, right? Look at me, and I'm not like inclined, to those sympathies. But when I was a kid in high school, swastikas are taboo. They've always been my whole life, swastika bad. And so it was like I couldn't help myself but to just draw endless swastikas like on my notebooks and like on the desk. It was just me. It was like several of us were like constantly, and we weren't like drawing them because we were Nazis. We were just drawing them because it was like literally the most dickhead thing we could draw.
Right. It's like, I think Aaron McIntyre made a post to Twitter. He worked as a teacher where he was talking about working at a 90% black high school where the kids would run around and yell white power because it would make their teachers mad. And he's like, obviously, they're not like Aryan Brotherhood guys, like, clearly.
And it's funny.
No, it's funny, 100% man. Right. And like, as culture has shifted more and more, like my wife worked as a teacher for a little bit. Homophobia re-entered culture because it was really funny again. Like, they successfully shamed about 15 years of kids out of not doing it. And then once your teacher became a blue-haired lady with like a nose ring and earplugs, it was like, all right, we're saying again. Like, this is funny.
Yeah. I've got a 11-year-old son, and, a couple years ago, it's just, you wonder, like what the kids are talking about. And I can't remember how, and, I got to be a little bit careful because his mother she doesn't necessarily share my, opinion about homosexuality and stuff like that. She's a little more liberal than me. And I can't remember exactly how it came up, but like, I said something about people being gay, and he made like a face, and I'm like, I know that face. So I asked, like, what do you guys like? I'm like, hey, dude, you can tell me, it's no big deal. Do you guys call each other gay if someone's being stupid? And he's like, yeah, no. I'm like, oh, it's back. Cause it's like, and it's like, dude, in the Marines, like, just endless accusations of someone being gay. Not really though. It's like, someone has a complaint. It's like, dude, why are you being gay about this? Just put the
it's literal. And then there's like, as an insult, and there's an overlap there, but not always,
There isn't. Yeah. Right. And I think that, I can never tell if I'm just being nostalgic for, I think it's natural for you to have nostalgia for these times in your life when you were young and carefree or whatever. But I remember the 1990s, when I'm a teenager, and then like early adulthood kind of, is just being like, and it definitely was, it's verifiably true that there was a lot less sensitivity. Like you
Mm.
could get away with a lot more. People would give you a lot more space to run your mouth. It was like you could say some things and people would try to figure out if you were actually being racist, homophobic, bigoted in some way, or if you were like busting balls, kind of. And then
Yeah,
we
well,
got
and
to
I
this
mean,
point. Yeah.
oh, sorry, but like you even see this with like the kind of height of cancel culture in like the 2020s, right? Where like I remember there was some, I don't even remember his name, but he was a prominent, he started like a culinary magazine, right? Famous guy, worked in that industry forever. And in the height of the kind of summer of Floyd, uh, he got canceled, right? Kicked out of his own company, kind of Papa John's esque situation. Because in like the mid 90s, he went to a college party with his now wife dressed up as a cholo, right? So like, exactly, right? Like the most mild thing ever.
Dude,
And
good.
his
Yeah.
his whole point was like, no one cared then, no one cared until right now. And it's like the most artificial thing ever.
Meanwhile, go find some cholos. I grew up around them. I'm California. Go find some cholos. Go find me a cholo that cares about that, like an actual street Hispanic guy. No, I don't
Yeah,
care.
just stupid. Well, anyway,
Yeah.
we're actually here to
Anyways,
talk about something really serious, right?
yeah,
You
yeah, yeah.
last time we talked and got into Younger and psyops and all kinds of interesting stuff. And you recommended to me a book by Younger that I cannot pronounce the title of.
I don't
Uh,
think I can pronounce it correctly either. I'm not sure.
yeah, so do you want to just introduce this book broadly? Maybe speak about how you found it, the impact it had on you, and then we can dig into the text more specifically.
Yeah, definitely. So we're talking about Younger's Eumeswil is how I've been saying it. So Eumeswil, Eumeswil.
I'll
And
go with
I
your
think,
pronunciation.
well, what have you been saying?
I haven't said it out loud because I'm afraid to look like an idiot.
Okay. Okay. And I think I got the order of these right. Yeah, definitely. So, this is a kind of continuation on a theme that he started with a book called Forest Passage. And in Forest Passage, he's playing with the idea of kind of a person who's a like an agent. This is somebody who has more agency than a normal person would have. Someone who's kind of hyper conscious of the reality that they find themselves in is how I would describe Younger's characters in these books. And they kind of make a pragmatic decision that, hey, look, I see the direction that this is all going in my society, my culture, my country, and I think that at a certain point it will become totalitarian to the point where I can't stomach it, and so I'm going to make a plan to basically ride it out. Okay, so um, that happens in Forest Passage, and that's what the Forest Passage is. He kind of goes out and secures himself a little space in the woods. There's a lot more to it, but that's the kind of the gist. In Eumeswil, he just goes deeper into the theme, and he describes the character in the book is what he describes as an anarch. And so important to discriminate between an anarchist and an anarch. And actually, let me read this quote from the book, and this will say it better than I can. So the anarchist, as the born foe of authority, will be destroyed by it after damaging it more or less. The anarch, on the other hand, has appropriated authority. He is sovereign. He therefore behaves as a neutral power vis-a-vis state and society. He may like, dislike, or be indifferent to whatever occurs in them. That is what determines his conduct. He invests no emotional value. So he's a man apart. He's in the place, but not of it. You know, um, he's making his own, decisions. Instead of joining a group, what most people will do is they'll see the landscape. They'll find whatever kind of subsection of society aligns with their values, and then they join that group. His thing is no group. I'm apart from that. And the in the background, or kind of what's driving all this for Younger specifically as a person is, he's just for anybody that isn't familiar, World War One, hero basically got whatever their highest award is, Knight's Cross or whatever. But becomes he goes to World War One and then becomes as an infantryman, like one of the early as they perfected the shock troop tactics that they're known for from World War One. He was early in on that, like one of the guys that helped develop it. But he wrote right after World War I, he wrote Storm of Steel, and Storm of Steel, globally acclaimed war book, but specifically very popular in Germany because instead of like making any apologies for the war, he kind of, when you read the book, he almost glorifies it, and but it's not a like cheap glorification of it. He's highlighting, the society that produced those kind of soldiers and, how they comported themselves in those trenches and stuff. And he makes no apologies for, enjoying some of that combat. And that resonated with me because of my wartime experience. Nothing like World War One, obviously. I have quite a bit of time, 6 combat deployments. And, when I'm honest about it, like what society expects you to do is kind of, I don't want to talk about it. And, it's this traumatic, it's like they install that in you. It's like, okay, you're done with combat. Now's your PTSD phase or whatever. And, not to, minimize anybody's suffering or anything, but, there's a lot about that experience that is positive for me that I would highlight, and things about, the people I was with that I find to be, great. So anyways, as Younger proceeds through his literary career, he writes a bunch of more books, but he's starting to see what's going on. This is Weimar Germany time, and he's sympathetic to the Nazis as they rise because he's a conservative right wing type of guy, and he doesn't like all these excesses of Weimar Germany. For all the reasons that a rational, normal person would, align themselves to the Nazis. But because he's smart, he kind of sees the writing on the wall on where that's all headed, and he makes a very strategic move in that he continues to write, but he does it in such a way where you can't definitively like Eumeswil was controversial for this reason because it's like you read it and you can be like he might be talking about the Nazi Party as the excessive authoritarian ruling elite in the book, but he might not be too. And so fortunately for him, he was starting to get the attention in a bad way of a lot of the upper echelons of the Nazi leadership. But Hitler was such a fan of Jünger and Storm of Steel that he basically said, just leave him alone. Send him to France. So he was posted as like a captain or something in occupied France, kind of doing like governance stuff. They had military, they basically make these military officers like the mayor of a district of the town. So he's doing that. And but what he's doing is he's establishing, he's establishing himself as this character that's the anarch. Like he has this idea that he can ride this out. Like he's either gonna get ground up in it or he's gonna find a way to ride it out. And I think that experience, gets reflected in the book Eumeswil, where, there's a person who's taking a la carte, like, hey, look, these laws I accept and I'll deal with. These ones I'll avoid. It's kind of like you're picking and choosing your way through the situation. And the reason it resonates with me is because I think that we're kind of in that time now where we should be thinking about, I think that we're going to come to the point where you're going to have a decision to make. And it has already happened. So it happened once at COVID from my perspective. You're going to be offered, kind of like an easy road or a hard road. Here's the easy road. Take this medicine that you may or may not believe you need. Okay. But I've seen plenty of people that knew they didn't want it, knew they didn't need it and definitely didn't want it, but did it anyway because the alternative was too difficult. It was like, hey, I got a mortgage, I got a job to do, that kind of thing, right? This is because they didn't see themselves as like a man apart that's sovereign, that's able to make these kind of sovereign decisions. Like, dude, the control of your internal biochemistry, like what you allow into your body, that should be a fundamental thing, no brainer, right? If I don't want it, I don't want it, I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling off the book itself, but
no. So there are several things there, and what's interesting about this book is that contained within it is both a critique of totalitarianism and of liberalism. Right? He's even-handed in that way. And for a little bit of context, this is one of Junger's technically sci-fi books. If you're going in expecting Star Wars, it is not Star Wars. But
no, it's
this is a sort of slightly advanced, but still kind of denigrated state, right? Somewhere in Spain, it's this kind of city state almost.
Yeah.
And it's sort of implied to be post some great war, right? You can either read that very deliberately as post World War I, the Great War, post World War II, or some future conflict. It's neither stated nor particularly important. And so this city is led by the Condor, right? Who's sort of this strongman type. And throughout the whole book, we find that this is an incredibly unstable city. You know, new powers are always coming in, you know, regimes are changing back and forth. And what's interesting is that this has bred a sort of fatalism in the people, right? No one other than the kind of like inner party apparatchiks cares that much about politics. Everyone is sort of resigned passively, right? They're just kind of subjects of history. And I think it's particularly interesting the way that Jünger talks about history in this book, right? Our main character is both an academic and a government figure, and we meet multiple academics who kind of offer us, you could almost say, like a different reaction to society, right? So one of the more interesting things at the beginning of this is our main character comes from a notable family, right? A family with a history. And his brother, half brother, and his father are both liberals. In the kind of truest sense of that word, we're not necessarily talking about like blue-haired AOC types here, but people who are opposed to, at least nominally, right, this authoritarianism on those grounds. And I want to read this section. He's speaking about a person in his past who is sort of a great man in this city, because both it offers an insight into, you know, these sort of liberal academics and also the atmosphere in this city, right? There are reasons why my father and brother, typical liberals, deal gingerly with Josiah. First of all, and this is understandable, they are perturbed by the way their ancestor is customized to fit current politics. Furthermore, an outstanding personality makes them squirm. Alexander, the Greek, or Macedonian rather, strikes them as an elemental phenomenon, a lightning bolt that is sufficiently explained by the electrical charge between Europe and Asia. There are bizarre congruences between liberal and heroic historiography. So there's a lot there, right? First of all, right, we see the way in which power contorts history. We've seen this obviously during the summer of Floyd. You know, the same men who were used to justify a previous version of the American empire were twisted into devils now, right? Robert E. Lee isn't a symbol of, you know, martial excellence and, you know, devotion to duty as he had been for, you know, decades before. He was evil, racist, bad man, right? We see that sort of distortion of history. But I think another one, and this is kind of interesting, is he does deal with the idea of the great man of history, right? He contrasts the heroic version of history with the liberal one, the idea where he says like Alexander was nothing more than, you know, the result of this kind of like friction producing an electrical shock, right? The same way if you rub your socks on the carpet, it makes a shock. You know, taking something like lightning, which is kind of cool and special and mystical almost, and reducing it to simply, right, the material, right, what you can feel and touch.
Yeah.
And I think that that's sort of an interesting, and this is something we'll see throughout the book, sort of this like double-headed critique. Going back to, you know, if we're going to accept this as a, you know, recounting of Jünger's experience in World War II, right? Both the critique of the liberals, right? The Weimar, but also the kind of totalitarian system, the strongman. And I think that that's what makes Jünger such an effective writer, is he is not this sort of, you know, straight up and down ideologue where you can put him into a box. He's recognizing both of these things have flaws in them. And I think that's what's particularly interesting. And I'll take a brief detour and then bring it back about Jünger's, people kind of smear him as like a militarist or a jingoist in Storm of Steel. And look, don't get me wrong, like he recognizes that there are positives to be found in conflict, that it's not a pure evil, that there's sort of a nobility in that. But also, if you've read Storm of Steel, it doesn't really sound like a fun time, right? Like there's routinely instances of just absurd human misery.
Yeah,
and so
you don't come away from it wanting to go there.
Right. His ability to recognize both sides of something, I think, is what makes him such an effective writer. But I'll throw it back to you, Aaron.
No, I mean, that's a good point. And he does that like you just described, like shows both sides of it with everything. Like you said, like he's I think that it's interesting when you're talking about like the his liberal father and brother that have a different perspective on these historical figures of him, and it's like it calls to mind for me I'm not a big bat Bronze Age pervert whatever, but I did read his book, and the Bugman thing did resonate. Like it that's how I've come to see these people, and they disdain the man of history, the man of the moment, because it puts them in direct contrast with how they are. Like they are only capable of operating while attached to. They're perfectly happy to socialize things like the application of force or anything like that. Like I'm gonna this is like what voting is. So voting in a liberal democracy, we as men are basically trading away. This is an agreement where we trade away our application of force for a vote. Like that's kind of an agreement. Like, hey, we're not going to use force to like cause change and pull you out of your offices and kill you or whatever. We're going to vote. We're going to use the vote instead. And it's like, which seems like a great idea and works for a while, but once you get to the excesses of it, well, now you're so far down the road of trading away your natural proclivity and the capability to apply force that you can't just fire that back up. Like we're going to have to work very hard to raise a generation of people that are even capable of thinking that way. That's the real,
You're 100% correct. And this is something that comes up in Jünger. I think I sent you a couple just like updates of me going through this book, kind of giving you, a short version of my thoughts. And I sent you, I believe, if not, I took a photo of it on my phone to save it, a section where Jünger is talking about exactly that, is talking about, violence and execution. But there was another quote that I thought was particularly apt, given you talking about the Bugman. And again, there's sort of two different locations this story takes place at. One is the Casbah, right? This sort of like castle, right? Where the strong man and his retinue live, and where
he's effectively a bartender for them.
Exactly. Yeah. So bartender and confidant. And then the other place is, at the university, right? Where the academics kind of, congregate. And Vigo is sort of our main character's mentor. He's sort of a man out of time, someone who is in and not of that society. And he's both recognized as a genius and constantly made fun of because he's unwilling to bend his thought, to bend his morality to the current situation. He's seen as both out of fashion in the previous regime and the current one. But there's a great segment talking about that kind of Bugman disdain for greatness, where he's talking about the students. And it's just this quick line where they're laughing at this guy for quoting, ancient poetry. And he says, they're quick to laugh. It makes them feel superior, right? Yeah. Which is exactly that desire to sort of denigrate someone attempting to index with something greater than themselves, just in a cheap way. Like, oh, if I laugh at it, I'm better than that. I think it's sort of an interesting like aspect of what you're describing there.
Yeah. And it's I'm like I'm big into laughing. Like I'm always making light of everything, but like what they're doing in the description, it's a mirthless laugh. It's not a joyful laugh. It comes from a different place. It comes from like an inadequacy, which is a weird origin for laughter. But there's something else that I was thinking about, kind of getting ready to talk to you about this, but the whole thing about the anarch, like, I'm reading the book, I'm really identifying with this anarch, and I'm like, yeah, this is the way, you set yourself up and you're smarter than the situation, all the NPCs are going to, wander right into the gaping mouth of the monster, but you're going to be the smart guy out in the woods figuring it out. Right. Okay, fine. But this happened to me a couple of times arguing with people on Twitter, which is basically, it's like you're creating hell in your own life, but yet I persist. And I can't remember exactly what the subject was, but it was basically like me making the case for, hey, what you ought to be doing is reducing your dependency on the system, probably relocating to somewhere rural where you have some control over your environment. You can all this other stuff. And the response I get from some of these like kind of like Royper type, I don't know, ultra right wing types, it's like, yeah, let's just cede all the ground to the barbarians, like pussies, and run off in the woods, and I'm like, so I haven't fully fleshed out like how I feel about that, because when I hear that, I go, yeah, you know what? There's something to this anarch thing that does feel like quitting or like ceding ground. What do you think about that?
Well, this is actually something that he speaks about in I believe it's the Forest Passage. I've read enough Jünger that they do start to blur together when he talks about similar topics. But he talks about like the character of someone like Robin Hood, right? Where like Robin Hood goes into the woods to survive the persecution of the regime, but he is waiting for the return of the king, and then he is welcomed as a prince. Similarly, he talks about and this, I think he uses the same word in a different context in this book, but the difference between a hermit and a partisan, right? Where the partisan is still doing something, they're doing action, but they can't go up against the machine directly and win. They'll be crushed like a bug. And I think that is what to take away from this, right? That there are times in which you can't just, unfurl your flag and say, we're going to fight, because the machine will just roll you over. It'll crunch you up and eat you. But you can still maintain, even in a totalitarian society, even in a mechanized, sort of like panopticon hellscape, you can still maintain personal autonomy, right? You can decide certain things that allow you to stay out of their control. And when he's talking about, building this base, like obviously that's literal in the narrative, but I think that what he's talking about is like having your place of retreat, having your escape route, so that they can't fully own you. And I think that that's at least how I took this, right? Is not to say, oh, we eternally retreat, just go out to the woods, protect you and yours, but to say like, look, like there are times when you have to index with a bad, evil system. You have to do it.
Yeah.
And there are ways to do that where you can maintain your autonomy, maintain your, sort of relation to it. And I think that, in this, through the character, we see this in the fact that he is simultaneously doing the bidding of power, right? He's literally serving them drinks. He's doing exactly what they want, taking their orders, but they don't own him, right? He is still his own man. And to me, that's what I think that this book is really about, right? If you are stuck in that system, how are you still your own man? Not necessarily should everyone go out to a giant bramble patch and live in a bunker, right? I don't think that's what he's saying.
Yeah. And on that, like, I think that, and again, this is another thought that I have, and I often can't tell if it's just like cope on my part or not, because, I got a buddy that I do a podcast with that, is pretty, he has a more black-pilled perspective, like he's more kind of negative on the future. And, I was consider like the way that you, like, you're talking about building the base in the metaphorical sense, right? This is where this is why things like family and community, which have been under assault now for decades, are so important, because, like, in a metaphorical sense, that's your base. Like your primary reality is your family unit, and then in a healthier society, your immediate your immediate culture that's around you, village culture or whatever it is. And then that's a primary reality. And then you're interacting with the state as necessary, but and it's happened in our politics, the way we organize our country, the way, it used to be organized that way. This was, this is why this was like a republic, on the meta and the macro level, this has all happened. And that's, I think that's part of a purposeful dismantling of these things that these are our base of strength, and it's where your moral orientation should come from. It should come from your people. You shouldn't be having it installed on you from the larger culture, which is what's happening now. People are so afraid to fall out of alignment with whatever the culture is saying is moral or ethical, but that's not the appropriate source of that. And so if you don't have that base, you can go it alone, but if you don't have that's how you check if what you're hearing from the culture is insane or not. You go, hey, does this match with what we think is reality? And I think so many people are atomized at this point that you get atomized enough and you're defenseless. It's like spread everybody out and pick them off one at a time.
Well, and I think that's a really interesting aspect about the society as described in this book, right? That families have fallen apart. There really is no loyalty of one man to another. We see that, many of these bureaucrats work in subsequent regimes. Many of these academics, they will either be, kind of discarded and rise as the political fortunes change, but others will, simply change their tune to what the moment requires. And
Yep.
One of the interesting themes in this, right, is the both dissolution of the family and also the relationship of like your father and your past to you as a man, because he has shall we say a kind of cold relationship with his father.
Yeah.
And one of
What
the
does he
things,
just? He has like a word for him. I can't remember. He has. He describes him in a very specific way. That's. Man, I wish I remember.
sorry,
Sorry to do.
if you're wondering why I'm looking down, I'm frantically flipping through this book to go through my schizoid notes. But there's, one of the things that's described is the fact that effectively the population is fully controlled down to reproduction, right? Like
Yeah.
it's very carefully balanced. And among the kind of like middle and upper classes, abortion and marriage are sort of completely and totally like destigmatized in the sense that like, our main character, his father tried to have him aborted. His mother decided to keep him around.
That's what it was. I'm sorry. Yep. That's what the thing I was thinking of was. It's not how he described it. It's the circumstances that caused him to completely lose respect for his father.
Well, exactly. And, multiple times we hear, other characters basically like kind of refer to both the fact that basically everyone is cheating on everyone and everyone is, constantly aborting their bastard sons. And at least in this work, Jünger doesn't take a moralistic tone on that, right? His character isn't saying an abortion is wrong and horrible, even if I may think that. What he's basically describing is that sort of check, right? That unit has been pulled apart. We hear of effectively only one relatively happy parental relationship, and that's him with his mother who died. It doesn't even barely even remembers her. And I think that that's a really interesting point because again, we see a society in which everyone has been atomized, right? That our main character has no institutions to fall back on. He has no family to fall back on. And so sort of against his will, he has been turned into an atomized individual, which I think is something that likely, many of the viewers can relate to. And so I think that if we take, Jünger's advice in this, there are two things, which is one, compare it to his other work where he talks about, the partisan, right? Maintaining your strength to strike strategically. And on the other end, it's like, well, if you don't have a support network, as many people don't, if you are simply an individual forced into this sort of, mechanized society, what are you to do? You don't have a lot of options. And, acting as an anarch is at least one way to, maintain, what little power you have.
Yeah. Yeah. As much as this resonates with me, I don't see anything like this in our current paradigm. I don't see any, there's a lot going on, a lot of little different movements and it's kind of hard to tell right now which way things are going to break. It's very chaotic right now. And you were just talking with Daryl Cooper and he's showing everybody, hey, look, the foundational myths of this liberal democracy, like he's kind of unraveling them. He's pulling at them, and you see the reaction, right? Like, it's like he's kicking a chair out from under people or something. They're freaking out at the mere, thought that any challenge to this whole set of narratives and stories that it's like, these are things like, World War II. It's like installed on you early and then it informs everything else from that point forward. And to the point where it's fairly ridiculous. Like that, you know, our country just operates how it does in the world, and it's like we're still coasting on this um this like kind of earned power and respect from World War II, and it's like that's not going to maintain much longer. Like the people that originally benefited from all that, the baby boomers, are dying off. And so I'm just saying all that to say that I think that we're in a dangerous time, because those myths, that's what it helps hold everything together. Like it's all just an agreement. These other countries just kind of agree that we're too powerful to mess with until they see something like us completely unable to, it's a proxy war, but basically we're losing a proxy war to Russia right now. Most of the world wants this stuff in Gaza to stop, and like we're the only ones that can really stop it, and we won't. So it's like these things are happening right now, and I think that, like, as much as I want the truth out, I'd rather have the truth than anything, but I can see that this is dangerous. This is dangerous because once we don't have that kind of myth that holds everything together, then what happens? And so that's why books like these are interesting.
Oh, 100%. And that's sort of an interesting parallel to the society we see here. In the same way that we could say World War II and a prominent event that happened there sort of formed the basis of our current society. Alexander occupies a similar role here, right? He is the central figure. And this is a really interesting section. Io to Vigo, that is his mentor. One of the geological findings in Eumeswil. A fellow like swamping on the Alexandrian foundation. The substratum was Alexandrian knowledge on a classical foundation. The values keep growing more and more shallow. First they were present, then still respected, and finally annoying. For Kessmuller, one of these academics, the very word value is suspect. Even before our times, they still had an afterglow, but the stove is cold. It no longer even warms the hands. No salvation comes from exhumed gods. We must penetrate deeper into the substance. And I think that's sort of an interesting way, right? That he describes this society that had a sort of great man, right? This kind of like Odinic figure who animated it and provided it a narrative to work around. And over time, right, as he says, it first becomes, kind of respectable, then kind of trite, then annoying, and then it's done away with altogether. And it's, again, right, that sort of soil out of which, the tree of civilization grows, right? It is like the Dust Bowl, right? It's being eaten away until there's almost nothing left. And I think that's a really interesting thing you bring up, contra, Daryl and, the work that he's done, where it's like, look, like there is a difference, right? Not all values are good values around which to organize a society. You can organize a society around a bad thing and direct it towards bad ends, in which case, attacking that set of values is a good thing. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, right, that is an interesting place for society to be in when the sort of spark that animated it is really gone. No one believes in it anymore. And so, as Jünger says, you sort of have to go back further. You have to find something deeper than that. And I think really like that is the conversation we are in right now, right? What is next? What is the thing that justifies our society's reason to exist? There's another great section in this, and really, I wish you guys could see my copy of it because I wrote all the way through it. But there's a really interesting part where he talks about the way that crime is handled in this city. Because if you've ever been outside, it will seem familiar. It reminded me a lot of Sam Francis's Anarcho-Tyranny, where basically he talks about how, and the Domo is the police chief, who's an interesting character throughout it. And what he basically talks about is the fact that there's a lot of crimes which no one really wants to solve, right? It's inconvenient to do so. It would draw attention to the fact that they're going on. And so effectively, and this is the exact quote, right? Speaking about how they sort of use organized crime to sort of regulate itself, right? That this way we relieve the police and the courts of an enormous workload. This way, aside from lunatics and gross criminals, we only have to deal with do-gooders who are more dangerous, which I think is interesting, right? Because I mean, look, like there was a recent incident out of Ohio where a white couple in their 50s got jumped
I saw
by,
that. I think, yep,
yeah.
beaten up pretty
And
well. Yep.
as awful it is to say, like many such cases, these things happen,
Yeah.
all too frequently. But the most interesting thing about that story is the reaction from the police chief, right? Where she, I think, is very, very upset about the fact that people are talking about it. She's like,
Yeah.
why are you broadcasting this? You're messing it
Yeah.
up. And I think that that's sort of an interesting thing where it's like, at least for her, and the police as described in this, actually stopping crime is not something they want to do. They
Yeah.
want to, have kind of like an easy, peaceable existence where they don't have to, do something dangerous or scary or be held responsible for their actions. And instead, right, it's, endless parking tickets, it's speeding tickets, it's the kind of like low level legal
Yeah.
harassment most people live with, right?
Yep. Yeah. Policing is an interesting thing, and it harkens back to what we were talking about. It's like, um, this is part of our social contract, but we as men abdicate our responsibility to maintain order in our environment. We abdicate it to these other guys, to these people in uniform that are paid employees that are actually, you know, employees of of a corporation, a municipality, and so these people they're enforcing policy. Is policy necessarily synonymous with, morality? Like the kind of things that, if I was living in a village, what would I be enforcing, and how would I be doing it? And it's just, it's, I don't have like a point to make other than I'm now cognizant of the fact that, I abdicate my responsibility. Like as a man, with children and, a wife to protect in an environment, um, I can't even take care of it myself. Like I'm now, if I try to maintain order in my environment in some way, now I'm a vigilante and I'm a criminal. So it's like this is part of and I don't think that's, well, I think it's just a symptom of the scale at which we live now. We don't live in villages anymore. So like maybe this is necessary, but what isn't necessary is to have a completely insane orientation towards policing, where it's like, you know these extremes of like, let's just get rid of all the cops, to anything a cop ever does is okay. It's like it's just yet another thing that it's a divisive thing. It's not a service that's provided, it's a controversy, everywhere it is. So
Well, it's like I hold the extremist position that I think people who, you know, shoot each other up at a drive-through should probably go to jail, but I don't necessarily want my sleepy small town police to have a decommissioned like IFV from Afghanistan rolling around. Like,
yeah.
I don't know, maybe that makes me an extremist. This whole book is full of just great quotes. And in a little bit, we're going to go to him just excoriating conservatives, which is, one of my favorite pastimes. So I thought that was a particularly good part. But one of the most interesting things, going back to our previous discussion of the kind of like myths central to society. And if you're wondering why I'm a little bit scattered, it's because I'm flipping through a 300-page book, frantically looking for my notes. If I was smarter, Aaron, I would have done what you did and got a notebook. Yeah. But in a period of decline, when it is considered glorious to have helped destroy one's old nation, the roots of language were not surprisingly likewise pruned. Above all, in Eumeswil, loss of history and decay of language are mutual determinants. Right? He basically talks about how, language is stripped down to the bare essentials, right? It becomes sort of like, like military lingo where there's like a series of acronyms, everything is hyper efficient, which, okay, fair enough, makes sense there. But also with that comes a desire to sort of do the same thing to history, to destroy and pull it apart. Yes. And if you've ever read, I mean, look, this book is 70 years old. The language in it is quite complicated. Like it's a difficult book to read, let alone, go back to what the Victorians were writing or even the American founding fathers. Right? These were not simple documents. And when you look at that, and Jünger does this quite well, I mean, this thing is dripping in references constantly.
Yes.
It's very clear that
you're looking stuff up the whole time.
History.
Yeah.
And I think that that's sort of an interesting thing when we contrast that with a lot of, modern writing. I recently had on a fiction writer, Carl Dahl, great guy, very talented writer. And he wrote a book that takes place in the Spanish Civil War. And one of the things that he talked about as an author was, one of his big pet peeves, which is writing a historical setting, writing a fantasy setting that takes place in the past through a modern voice, right? How modern people talk, because there's a dissonance there. And I think
Yeah.
that what Jünger is talking about, that right, that as as technology, right, as a society goes into decline, right, as it sort of starts to lose that spark, there's that desire to sort of standardize and simplify and bring everything to the kind of lowest common denominator. And I mean,
Yeah.
look, man, like if you ever want to laugh, read BBC Pigeon, right, which is like the the sort of Nigerian version of the BBC, and you'll see that in its ultimate form.
Oh,
Right, it sounds like
pigeon,
Jar Jar
pigeon. Yeah,
Binks
yeah.
reading the news.
Yeah,
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 of
yeah.
course. But even like look at modern government documents, right? The sort of executive orders that come out. And sure, there's a little bit of legalese, but contrast that to what our American founding fathers were reading or writing, and it's like, what the hell have we done? Right? Like this is a
Well,
decline.
you ready for the black pill? Because
Yeah, of course.
it's about to get much worse. And language is a big deal, and it's language has almost magical qualities if you really think about what it actually is. You've got this kind of coded system of characters when you write that, the end result of which is it stimulates thoughts, the connection to like neural synapses in people's brains or whatever. It's like a mystical thing, and so when you adulterate language, or you know what people are doing now. So writing is a skill that you got to develop, um and it's a it's a complicated thing to understand language and use it appropriately, and like you said, for appropriate for the time period you're writing about and all that, right? So this is, and I think that you know literature, obviously we're talking about literature here. It's one of these things that we can access, as we can grab onto it, like as everything else is disintegrating around us, and we don't know what's real, and we don't know what's just a contemporary facet of our current reality, or what we're, you can grab onto literature, something that was written a couple years ago, and go, look, these various places in history, these people have written this very same thing, like this very same pattern repeats, this theme repeats, or whatever, right? Going forward, we're about to see, I think we're just on the cusp of people just simply using AI to create everything from documents to fiction. Like the degree to which we use it in my current job, and it's like I do use it, to I'm talking about technical papers, or our the outputs of our work or whatever. But like, even I think even in fiction or whatever, once a writer will be somebody who has a mastery of prompts, of prompt writing. Right, a writer will be a prompt writer. Not in every case, but I think that most of the stuff that's going to be available commercially or consumed by the mass bulk of society is going to be created through prompts.
So this is not at all what I plan to talk about, but this is one of my perhaps more controversial opinions, which is that basically the rate of people who are literate has not changed at all through history. We have people who can read technically, right? Like they could read a stop sign. Although I don't know if you've looked into this. I think the US literacy rate is only like 74%. It's really not as high as you'd think it would be. Yeah, and you see this every once in a while. I can't remember I don't want to slander this guy, but it might have been Plaxico Burress or another prominent NFL player from like 15 years ago who got to the NFL combine and it was revealed he could not read, right? He'd graduated college without it. So that does happen. But the reason I bring that up is that like you could look at AI and say, look, like that is the death of literature. And it's like, well, it may be the death of like mass market fiction, right? The kind of like, stuff that you see for sale at an airport. But like the thing that makes this sort of literature interesting is not simply the fact that it exists, right? It's not simply the fact that, something exciting happened. I mean, to be honest, man, this book doesn't really have a plot. There's not like a big action scene in it. You're kind of just getting,
Not really.
Our main character's internal monologue, right?
Yeah.
It is interesting, but that's not something that has mass appeal. And so it would be very difficult to do. But if you could measure like how many people in, 14th century London could read versus how many people now actually read, like are interested in ideas or interested in the genuine kind of content of that.
I get what you're saying. Like effectively, then, if that's the case, then the kind of the market for, like, you can create all the AI produced stuff you want, but there's only ever going to be a sliver of the population that's interested in anything else anyway.
100%. And like,
Yeah.
let's be honest, what realistically is the difference between like the animated corpse of Tom Clancy writing like his 15th book after he died and an AI, right? Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
sure. They paid some ghostwriter 30 grand to write a
Yeah.
book. Like,
Yeah.
okay, that's
Or,
technically different.
or like those Stephen King books that he didn't write or whatever,
Oh
but they
yeah,
put his
a
name. So weird. Like,
100%.
what the fuck? Like,
Yeah,
I didn't write it, but here you go. Enjoy.
my name is on it. Uh, do you know that Joe Biden's writing a book now, apparently?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure he is. I'm sure he's I picture him. I picture him up with a typewriter and a cigarette like Hunter S. Thompson in the middle of the night, just clacking away.
Yeah,
He got inspired and had to get out of bed and start fleshing
and
it
then
out.
the camera cuts and it's him sitting at an empty table just talking to a room full of nobody, just
Oh
like
my God.
out of his mind. But point is, yeah, I mean, I think that's, I don't know, that is something that I guess provides me some hope. And that's actually an interesting thing in this, is that, and I don't have a quote pulled up, but one of the things that our main character constantly talks about is different sort of different assumptions about humans. And our main character is very, very pessimistic about like the average person and just how people act, which, given his context makes a lot of sense. And also why, right, he considers himself a part, right? He basically views this as like, well, I can't trust people to act well, right? I can't trust people to act honorably. And so, in this society full of, secret police and moles and, a disintegrated family unit, it's like, well, you sort of are forced to become an island of one in a context like that. The one of the other kind of routine things throughout this is, he talks about how technology changes everything, right? Obviously,
Yeah.
you see this in Storm Steel, you see this in
Yep.
Glass Bees, which is a personal favorite of mine.
That's a good
And
one too.
obviously, a lot of Glass Bees is semi-autobiographical. All of Steel of Storm is autobiographical, and he talks about and this is something we spoke about before we went live, but the transition between pre and post industrial warfare.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that goes through, in great detail, right? He talks about, honor and basically the way in which that same sort of like cheap superiority looks at honor. He talks about, these sort of people who look cynically at, the cavalier, right? The guy with the charging in on horseback who's been, shot by a modern rifle, and they laugh at that guy. And he's sort of asking you to pull back, be like, well, why are you? Like, sure, that guy was out of date, but that's an honorable man charging into this sort of unthinking machine. And this, I think, is a great section. The world civil war changed values. National wars national wars are fought between fathers. Civil wars between brothers. It has always been easier to fall under the father's hand than into the brother's. It is easier to be an enemy of another nation than another class. And, when we talk about that kind of post-war consensus, what it really is the idea that, war is illegal, that we're all one big unified thing. And so any war is no longer, this kind of patriarchal war of nation against nation. It sort of becomes a civil war. I mean, let's be honest. That's what Russia-Ukraine is, right? They're not to trigger the Ukrainians, but they're basically Russians. Let's be honest.
They're all Slavic. It's a brother war. It is a brother war.
100%. And I think that way that, it goes from being, kind of you are a different people to you are, either a traitor, right, within the confines of a polity, or like a class enemy. Like we saw, I mean, let's be honest, during COVID, right? It was basically a lot of class warfare, let alone what we saw in kind of the Soviet world. But yeah, do you want to speak a little bit about that sort of transition between honor-based warfare and this more kind of mechanized warfare?
When you were talking about that, it made me think. It made me think of this documentary I saw about Ukrainian drone operators in the current conflict. And what it was showing was this young guy who was like a professional gamer prior to Russia's invasion. Now he's repurposed as a drone operator, and they're showing their kind of workflow. They'll put a bunch of drones in Pelican cases, put them in this truck in the middle of the night, drive down this sketchy road and get into this bunker. And then he, the dude's got earrings in. He's like kind of wearing a uniform. He's got weird facial hair and he's vaping. And he's just vaping and killing Russians with his drone. And the tone of the documentary was like very clearly like, um, you know, um, all elements of Ukrainian society are engaged in defending themselves from the Russians. Even this guy's a gamer, he's now killing Russians and very cavalier about the whole thing that he was. It's like I've been in war. When you kill the enemy, you are very like casual about it. You laugh, you joke, you smoke. Hopefully you don't do anything fucked up to the corpses or whatever. But like you definitely don't. So I can sit there and lament the passing of your enemy. So I get that. I'm talking about the tone of the documentary though, and it's like we're missing something here because we're okay. So say what you will about Putin or whether or not he was reasonably provoked into doing what they're doing. It doesn't have anything to do with the Russian infantrymen who gets sent to Ukraine, right? And so now we're watching like basically it's like half video game, half real. And so then it's like, what's the next step? Like, are we, um, we're now like lower on the food chain than some of this technology. We have been for a while. It's like, and I've seen this in warfare. Like, it's a consideration for a commander to whether or not he's going to put aircraft at risk. Based on if humans are at risk on the ground. That's part of the calculus. It's like, well, it is a $35 million aircraft. You know what I mean? Like that's part of the calculus.
You get paid 35 grand a year. Like that's that calculus is made. Well,
but even as someone, I have a lot of, I have a lot high tolerance for like, dude, it's like almost like a professional fascination. Like I'll watch as much like war footage as someone will put in front of me. But I'm mostly, I'm mostly interested in like, what are these guys doing? Like, what are their tactics? Like, how are they using this technology? It's like mostly a professional thing. I'm not like, it's not a voyeurism necessarily, but like something about that though really bothered me. And it's like, I guess I'm just putting myself in the place of these Russians and like, that's not it's an unglorious end, to have a little toy helicopter come blow your head off,
Well, and this sort of connects to our previous discussion about that kind of scoffing instinct. The moment where I basically decided that I didn't care if Ukraine was turned into a parking lot was largely because of Western Ukrainian supporters on the internet. And
that's it. Yeah.
It was a video. It was a drone footage. If you've seen one, you've seen them all. But what made this one particularly disturbing is there was a Russian and he was hit by one grenade, messed up. And he was sort of laying on the ground, legs poking the wrong way. And you see him there, like crossing himself, praying. And they drop another grenade right on top of him. And okay, fair enough. Like bad things happen in war. I get it. But to me, it was the reaction afterwards, right? Turning it into like a football highlight reel. All of these people making fun of him for, praying to Sky Daddy, like just relentlessly mocking this guy who's not only at the end of his life, but trying to do something transcendent in that moment. And it was like, and again, like, I don't really tend to have a weak stomach about this sort of stuff. Like, I get that part, right? It wasn't necessarily, I don't like watching guys get blown up from drones, but like, it doesn't like stick with me that long. But it was that reaction to it, right? Where it was just like, I know exactly what you mean about feeling like we are lower on the food chain than this stuff.
Yeah. And, the thing about the Ukraine war, and, maybe it relates to the book in some way. That whole thing is like colored for me by, like you said, the Western democracy support of it, but more specifically how our liberal democracy, the Biden administration, engaged, all of their tools to get us, because what they need is for us to support this thing. They need us to, share their Russophobia. For these people, Russia has been the looming monster for their whole life. They can't, the Cold War never ended or whatever, right? But so, when I see things like U2 goes over there and plays a concert in a Ukrainian subway, and then Sean Penn flies over there and gives Sean Penn, the actor, who's an asshole, flies over there and gives Vladimir Zelensky, who's an actor and an asshole, an Oscar. An Oscar is an award for acting. You know what I mean? So I'm like, this is reality itself communicating to me that I'm watching a show in some respects here,
I was about to say, there's almost like a dark sense in which he earned the Oscar more than anyone else did. Right?
I mean,
like
it is it's absurd. So like another thing is like for me to get by day to day without, bumming myself out, I have to like allow myself to enjoy some of the absurdity a little bit. And, the fact that his last job prior to becoming the president of Ukraine was playing the president of Ukraine on a sitcom, on a television show.
If this happened in a movie, you'd be rolling your eyes. Look at that.
Yeah, you'd be like, this
that would never
so
happen.
much of our reality right now is shitty writing. Like you said, if this was a script, we'd be like, come on, man, fire the writer. This is stupid.
Yeah, man, 100%. I mean, let's be honest. The sentiment of this is stupid, let's fire the writer is basically the last 12 years of politics, right?
Yeah.
It just keeps getting dumber.
Dude, and I guess this is off topic, but like, I don't find this current crop of like Trump's current merry band of warriors, they're like the most ridiculous people I've ever seen. Like
100%. Yeah.
I'm on the cusp of like, bring the Biden dickheads back. Like, not really, but
say what you will. Biden was really funny in a way that Trump isn't. Like Biden was always like saying crazy stuff, falling off bicycles, sniffing hair. Like his son was a crack addict. Like, come on, that's entertainment. And like, look, if all politics is vote for red man, vote for blue man, your entire country gets sent to Israel, then what does this matter? Like, at least make it funny,
Yeah, it should be entertaining. And I'm sorry, I'm not entertained by Dan Bongino or like these people. I know the boomers like swoon over that guy, but I'm like, what is this thing with what are these people? Like, who are these people? Everyone around Trump's just like weird, off. You're like,
100%.
Weirdos.
The one that I still kind of like, mostly just because he had a brain worm and talks like a crazy person, is RFK. But I want more RFK. Like, stop doing stuff. I don't care about like banning food dye. I just want you to start talking about ravens and doing crazy stuff or killing a bear in Central Park.
Dude,
like,
if you get into RFK lore, he was a wildcat, dude. Like, so not to get in too much into it, but like had a competition, a decades long competition with his cousin on who could go down on more chicks. And it's like, you say that what's going on with your voice box is a vaccine related injury. I think you got into some. Yeah, dude. I think you gave yourself some throat cancers from all your wild behavior. But
this is such a stupid story. I love RFK. I think he's the funniest guy in the world. In the same way that I think Hunter Biden is the funniest guy in the world. It was just like, all right,
I like that he's jacked. Like, I like that he goes to Venice Beach in his jeans and just pumps them out. I'm like, why not, dude? Why not be 65 and jacked? That rules.
100%. There's no bigger flex, literally, than showing up to Venice Beach in jeans as a 70-year-old like political figure and just repping out like 3 plates. Like, all right, you won me there. But one really funny story is, are you aware at all of the I think her name is Olivia Nuzzi, that whole scandal?
Wait, I don't think so.
She was a journalist, and basically what happened is she fell in love with RFK and went nuts. She was like texting him from different phones, sending him like nudes to like his wife, like crazy stuff. And so eventually RFK's like, fine, I'm just going to sue you. Stop doing this. Which, at the point that you are too horny for RFK, like that is a whole nother level of just nuts, right? Like if you've got to that point.
Dude, so imagine being that dude's age and dealing with, that's the kind of stuff that would happen to me when I was like 22, like,
exactly.
Dude. And again, not to drag this into the gutter, but like to be that horned up at that age, like, dude, I'm almost 50, I'm like 49, bit early to mid 40s, I've corrected the issue now. I'm on like TRT, but like at the time I'd noticed, I'm like, you know what, man, I'm just not as interested in all that as I used to be. It must be just me getting, and dude, I think naturally that proclivity is supposed to kind of fall off a little bit. Not for these dudes.
Are you implying that RFK might be indulging in some extra strong protein powder? Are you
No, he's
saying that?
all natty. But I don't even care.
Well,
I
dude,
don't care what he's on. But like, but he, him aside, the rest of these weirdos, like these 70-year-old politicians that are in these sex scandals, it's like, dude, that's pathological. Like, there's
oh,
something other.
100%.
That's not about your actual libido. That's about it's a pathology. Like, these guys really freak me out. Like, Lindsey Graham is another one where I'm just like
Oh, dude.
fascinated by that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm actually gonna have to, if I remember, censor this episode because I said a word you're not supposed to say. I've gotten
Oh,
2 strikes on my channel ever. One one was for COVID stuff, which was weird. It
yeah.
happened like this year, which I was surprised by.
Oh,
And
really?
the other one was referring to former Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg by a impolite term for a bundle of sticks. And
Ah,
I'll
yeah.
put it
Well,
this way: I can't talk about Lindsey Graham without risking another channel strike.
I very purposefully, I think we would probably say the same thing. It has to do with an insect. Is that what you were gonna
Yeah,
say? Okay, yeah,
yeah.
we'll leave it. But I was like, oh, I got something I could say, but I'm not gonna.
Well, dude, we are over time. This was a ton of fun. I'm
Yeah,
gonna have
man,
to
this
have
has
you
been
back
great.
on. I just want to
Anytime, man.
clarify. We touched, I mean, maybe 5% of the content in this book. It's incredibly dense. Buy this book. It's not
Yeah.
expensive. You can get it from anywhere you want. Highly recommend it. But Aaron, if people want to find more of you and your work, where can they do that?
Well, I have a podcast I do with my buddy called Stranger by the Hour. We got kicked off YouTube a while ago. We have a clips channel on there, but you can just find us on Twitter or on Patreon. We'll put out free episodes on Patreon too. So Stranger by the Hour, and that's basically it. And hey, actually, while we're talking about it, congrats to you on doing this full time, dude. That's
Oh,
really cool.
thanks, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, highly
Very cool.
recommend all of your work. Will be linked down in the description. As far as my stuff, Jay Burden Show, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you want to listen to podcasts. If you want the episodes early and ad free, you got to throw me a few bucks at either Patreon or Subscribestar or Substack. I think that's all of them. There may be more. Who knows? But again, Aaron, this was a ton of fun, man.
Dude,
I'll have to have you
yeah, man.
back on.
Anytime.
And everyone at home, keep your head up. Well, I can't
All
last
right.
forever. Good night.